Hi, everybody. The theme of this exercise will be in and around working with sort of yellowish colours. Uh, Although, to be honest, when we talk about colour, it's hard to know because what is colour, and that's just an interesting little point to keep in mind. Color only exists because of light in a way. So as we all know, if you have an object that's blue or whatever, and you put it in a room with a completely different colored light, it will not look blue anymore. It'll be purple or something else. So it's just one of those things. But what we're looking at in terms of pigment anyway and paint is sort of yellowish tones today. I'll bring up actually what we're going to look at. Let me see. Here we go. So there is our subject, a nice lily, a yellow lily, and we're going to have a look at that. And again, just like all the other things that we will look at first glance, we look and think, my goodness, how many different sort of yellowish colors are going on there, and there are many, of course, because they're all melded together. But we, as usual, are going to isolate a small number as little samples for you to match in color, and then you can apply those to your painting itself. Please do keep in mind as well that the paintings you're doing should be really quite small. Now you'll see when it comes to my demo what I mean, but there's no point in doing a big painting of any of these things because it just takes too long and you're not achieving any more. What you want to do is, can I match this color? So whether that's on a little 1 centimeter scale, you've matched it. If it's on a 5 centimeter scale, you've also matched it. The only difference is it takes a lot longer to paint, fill in all those big shapes. So keep them. We're going to have little tiny paintings this time. Anyway, going through this as we did with the previous painting, what I did was I selected a handful of colors and sampled them. So what I'm hopefully going to do here, and hopefully again you can see this happening, I'm going to see actually if I can maybe bring it in a wee bit closer. That's maybe a bit big, but I'll maybe have to go out, beg your pardon, a wee bit smaller. Okay, so what my plan is to take about 4 maybe samples, possibly 5. We'll see what happens. If we look at the top of the flower, the lightest part of the flower, you'll see that obviously there are very bright highlights where the sun's catching it on the left side and on the right mainly. And then you have this really vibrant sort of lemonish yellow in between those two. So what we're going to do is sample those first. So what I'll do is I'm going to take a little piece of that one, and I'm going to move that over to the side. So there's the middle part of the top part of the flower. I'll make it bigger. Just bear with me. So there's our color there, near enough. Then what I'm going to do is try and get a little sample, pick a little sample off the highlight. And because it's probably not white, once you see it, once you see this beside the other one, you'll see what I mean. Have a look at that now. You can see that color, there's slight variations in it, but it's very light, but it's not pure white. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. It's always a common mistake we all make, which is to put white highlights on things. Very rarely are highlights pure white, Anyway, let's move down to the next color, which is going to be this main side of the petal on the right hand side, which is mostly the same color. You could say that there are variations, but generally speaking, again, I'm going to sample a little bit of that and take it and bring it over there. And again, I keep saying this, it's wonderful when we really look at the colors that we see in an object. They're not isolated like this. you realize how complicated they are. You know, there's another color. What I'll do now is move to the left petal way low down here, where it starts to become really quite dark. So again, we'll drag a little sort of sample color there and copy that, and we'll bring that over. And there we have the color there. And again, I'm going to try to make it a wee bit bigger. Okay, so we'll have that. And finally, what I might do, I'm going to attempt right at the very base of the plant. There's a very dark tone here, so we'll maybe sample a little bit of that if we can. And again, let's bring it over. Look what we've got there. So it really is an interesting set of images or colors there. We've got a little swatch of tone and color. And what we might want to do, I wasn't going to get too concerned about the greens, but I'll take a little sample of green from the right hand side over here, bottom right, just as a sort of an example for a background. I will put it way down at the bottom here actually. So there it is there, squeezed in just about. Okay, so look at the little swatch of color that I've made. They're all directly taken from that photograph. And you know what's interesting? I began this by saying we're dealing with yellows and things, but look, how much yellow do we see there? Isn't that interesting that we look at that and say it's a yellow flower, or yellowish flower? It is yellow in a sense, but in reality, look at the observed colors are really there, and that is another problem when we try to paint unobserved, because we make assumptions. Because we always associate apples being red or green or flowers being yellow or whatever, and that is in our heads, and we get out the yellow paints and then we suddenly realize why is this not working, because the reality is there isn't that much yellow in it anyway. So what we're going to be doing in the next stage of this little video is to look at these colors and try to match them and then apply them to our little framework in terms of the flower itself. So hopefully all that makes sense to you. We'll now move to the next phase where we're actually going to attempt the color matching part of it. Okay, so we're now working on the idea of yellows. So basically what I've done here is I've chosen a subject that we would associate with the word yellow, if you like. But again, as we've seen when we look at samples from the color, from the object, you'll see that actually there are a lot of things going on other than yellow. In fact, it's only when you come up here do you say this is what we might call yellow. So this is very often, as I say, the problem that sometimes we say, oh, those flowers are yellow, and therefore we dominate our paintings with yellow, whereas there's a difference between what we think the flowers are and what we see. And I think that's, in this exercise, something quite important to keep an eye on and keep thinking about. What I've done, as I did before in the previous little exercise, is I've just made a very simple outline kind of drawing based on the image, and you can see that it's split into the pretty much the areas where I want these little color samples to go. So if I'm gonna cover that temporarily and move my palette over, just move the light a little bit so it's not a sphere. And we're going to try to begin with yellow for everything. In other words, what we'll do is, since we're saying this is about yellow, we'll use yellow as our base for each of the colors. So let's look at this first one. We'll work from the lighter, I guess, down and see how that goes. So with this in mind, what I'm going to do is just take, and remember that we're looking at lemon yellow, by the way, which is quite important, because I think it is one of the yellows that can give you more variation, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to get some lemon yellow out onto my palette here. Okay, so we're getting that out there and thinning that out. Okay, so because we know it's light, I've got my little sample card there as well, these samples here. And let's have a
let's begin with a little piece on the end of that. You can see that, and let's have a look at that. And you can see I'm happier enough with the brightness of the color, but you can see it's clearly too yellow. That, in fact, you know, even though we were saying, oh, it's yellow, really look at that. It's not quite as greeny yellow as that. It's a little bit warmer than that. So that means we've got to ever so lightly put in a tiny little bit of our crimson. And you can barely maybe see what's going on there, but it is going in there. You saw a little drop going in. And this is a challenge, to be so tiny in the amounts that we use. And that is an exercise in itself. Look, you can see now that is less greeny yellow, let's call it that, and a wee bit warmer than the previous one. Okay, so I had the previous one around, but I can't find it right now. But you can see that is a little closer to the yellows that are in there, you know. So maybe at this point, what I'll do is take that little color here and just apply it to the outer part, this little corner here, where I sort of observe that lighter tone. Okay, so just ever so lightly. And again, remember with watercolor, you know, the variations, the paper changes it, the dryness changes it, all sorts, you know. So I'm just going to put those in as two little blocks. So this time around, we're still working like painting by numbers, I suppose. So what I'll do now, pause for a second, clean the palette, and move on to the next color. Okay, so we're now moving on to the second of our little samples, which is this one here. And you can see where I've indicated that's over here in this area, and to some extent in there in this inner part of the flower. So I put out again lemon yellow. Hopefully, as I say, computer screens and whatever will vary the color, so you know there are discrepancies here, but I can assure you that it's lemon yellow. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll actually begin as always with just the pure yellow as it is. There it is. It's easier to see almost on the paper. And let's look at that beside that. Again, like the previous one, it's too cold. It needs warmed up. So remember, we're looking firstly at tone. So we maybe want a deeper color, slightly more yellow. But remember, if we're going to warm this, in other words, if we're going to move it from yellow more to the orangey end of things, it will get darker as well, because red is a darker color than yellow. So we have a yellow here, which is a light color in itself. And we know that red's crimson is darker than this color. So that when we add that, that will move this color down and become not only darker in tone, but also warm. So sometimes the change can happen. We're killing kind of two birds with one stone in a sense. So there goes in a little of my crimson into that. I'll tear this bit off so that we have that, and apply this, and let's have a look at what we've got there. You see, we've maybe gone too far. I think that's a wee tiny bit too reddish in my opinion. So that's okay. We will then recompensate with adding in a little more of lemon yellow. So we're cooling it down again. There goes the lemon yellow in there. We'll bring that, tear that off, and just apply that. And now you can see that that's becoming much better in terms of color. It needs to be a bit deeper, you know, tonally, and I think that's simply because there's too much water in it. So what I'm going to try to do is just intensify the color itself. Turn that around there and put that on, so you can see that if there's color goes on with less water, you can see what we've got. We're really quite close in there. So what we've done there was take our lemon yellow base color, and we've asked, is it warmer or cooler? It was warmer, so we added red. We went too far, so we compensated with pushing back to the yellow end. So we're moving from yellows to reds, orange, you know, from lemon yellow across. That's that segment. So in other words, if we look at our color wheel, we're starting somewhere out here, and we've been moving and adjusting the color that way. So when we go too far and we say, oh my goodness, we've gone too far, it's too warm, be careful to say, oh, when we want to cool it, you put blue in, because that's too extreme. You know, the cooler end of this color is towards the yellows, so don't go to the extreme, otherwise you'll muddy them up. Okay, so in other words, if I want to warm that color up, I'll add a tiny wee bit of red and I'm pushing it that way. And if I think it's gone too far, I go back with the yellows. I want to get it back to the primer yellow. So there is our zone for variation in there. Okay, when we're dealing with yellows, stroke yellow orange, if you like. Anyway, before my paint completely dries here, I'm going to put a little piece of this color on my painting here. I might actually change the brush in a minute, and there's a little bit of it in there as well. Okay, rinse that brush, just get my bit of tissue here, and I'm going to dab that in. The other color might have been a bit dry by now, but we'll see if I can blend it. Again, remember, as I said before, we're not in the business of making framed pictures here. What we're doing is trying to make colors that we observe. So we can see what I've done there, and hopefully you can see it in relation to what's going on there. It'll make more sense, I hope, as we move through the other colors as well. So we'll pause again, clean up, and go for the next one. So our next color is interesting because we're now moving into the warmer zone. So you can see it here, and to some extent a little bit down there as well. So we can maybe use that color for both those things there, that little sample. But certainly, as you can imagine, pardon me, just get that out of the way, if I was to take our lemon and hold it up against our target color, which is this one, we are way off, as we know, and we know immediately that we've got to warm that up. So, and you've noticed, by the way, as yet, I haven't really desaturated colors. I haven't used the complementary color to muddy the colors up yet, because so far the colors have been fairly pure. So sometimes there's no need. You might hit the color and match it and say, well, that's it. Don't feel you must also desaturate it. Sometimes the color doesn't need desaturated because it's not desaturated, if that's not muddy. So we're now, as I say, looking at this color here, which is certainly much more orange, much more in the red end. So we'll go straight in, and in small amounts again. You know, don't go too crazy too soon. Okay. Add a tiny bit of that. Just let's do it step by step and see how the progress. So we're still too greeny, too yellowy. So we still have to drop in and warm that up a bit more and tear that off. Make a new sample here and have a look at that. Still not quite there yet. So you want to get a slightly more concentrated color in here. I've added quite a lot more red here. Tear that off, put that on. So all I'm doing is adding more and more red. Look, we're getting in there now. Again, I think that's quite close, with the exception of being a little bit on the thin, watery side. So I'm making that a little bit richer there to see what's happened. I think it maybe have gone a wee bit too far to the red end of things. So let's try and push it back towards yellow. Rinse the brush, damp it off a little bit, get a little bit more yellow back in there, and see if we can find a compromise color here somewhere. Let's get that on there. Let's see where we are. So we're really getting close in there. Again, I think if I was to put that on slightly more densely, we can see that we're pretty much there. I think you can see the variations of that's created by the water. So again, I think what we've managed to achieve a color without necessarily desaturating it yet, making it muddy, because I think it's still quite pure. So with this color then, we'll drop this in to the areas of my little painting that I believe had these sort of richer, or almost orangey colors really. So So we'll put that in. So as I say, these are only 5 or so samples. And I keep saying this, we know that there are probably thousands of different colors going on here, different variations of yellow, stroke orange, and all the rest of it. But for this exercise, we've got to keep it simple, obviously. I'm going to blend that out there, just around the edges, so that it looks a wee bit more natural, you know, and blend that out there. But there's another thing going on that we're going to look at in a minute anyway. But we've now got at least 3 tones. I just want to be a bit obsessive here and just drop that in, but we'll not get too carried away. What I want to see is a relationship of these colors together here. I think maybe what it is, I just would like to get that a little bit further up there, but I'm hoping the paint isn't too wet beside it, make it bleed. So we'll settle for that at this point in time. Let that dry back there, you know, so you can see the sort of color scheme that we've got, and we can sort of see, I hope, sorry, beg your pardon, you know, we're getting in and around there. Might need to be a wee bit richer, but remember, we're dealing with watercolors here, so slightly different thing going on, if you like. What I maybe do, just notice there that there is a little bit of this color going on down here, so let that happen. And it's just this bit we want to deal with soon. So before I do that, I'll just bleed that in a little bit, so it's not a harsh line. Okay, so there's a little bit we're going to deal with next, and that's actually we're now coming down, interestingly enough, to these colors. Really quite begin to be a bit different, if you like. So let's clean, and we'll start that in a second. So here we are working with our next sample, which is this. Okay, and you can probably see a pattern emerging. We're starting each time with lemon and trying to manipulate that around to what we want by the adjustment of the brightness, the temperature, and maybe the saturation as well. But when we look at this, we clearly know, even when you look at the palette, you know how far that is from that. Certainly much warmer. The temperature is much warmer. So we'll do as we've done before. We'll just then drop in bit by bit our crimson, and we can test this. So we'll put a little bit of a tester on there, and you can probably guess that it's got a long way to go to get to the warmth, the temperature that we're seeing there. So it is like the previous one, considerably redder. So I'm going to put a little sample of that on beside the other one, actually. See, so you can see now we're getting closer. So it's a wee bit more like what we did before. But what I believe might be happening here is we are at a point where this color, just tear that off and let you see this. So if we take that color there, and you can see we're getting into the richness and the density of the color, okay, and the warmth. But look at that color. Our target color is actually slightly muddy. It's grayish, isn't it? And that's the first time we've talked about desaturating here. So in other words, maybe what we do need to do is desaturate. How do we do that? Just to remember, we've got a red orange here. We're around there. So the color we're looking at is blue stroke blue green. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to work with blue first of all, and I'll just show you how little. I'll put a wee bit on the side there. So that's just a little bit of blue there. You know that that's not an awful lot. So what's on that brush, I'm going to drop in, and it really isn't, as I say, that's just barely what occupied the brush and no more. But I want you to see how that then changes the color to become like this. And you can see, as I say, it needs to be a bit more dense. Let's have a look at the more intense version of it. And look where we are now. We're really very close. So that tiny, tiny bit of blue there was enough to move our yellow and slightly desaturate it. Because that's the first color, I would say, in our little list where the color begins to get muddy. Okay, so let's drop that, and I hope I've got enough of it to make an effect. As I say, I'm maybe underestimating. What I'm going to do is actually make, if you bear with me, I'm going to make another batch very quickly, showing my, and take that wee bit of blue there and the red there until I get back to that. So say you will get to a point where you find it becomes much quicker to do this. You can see there where we're at there now, and drop this in. Okay, so I want to occupy this area here, and it should actually be quite a bit darker really. So I might go back on that one actually in due course, but we'll put it in for the moment, and we can see that there's a difference happening there, and I'll try to just ever so gently blend that into the other one. As I say, I'm not getting too concerned about making a picture as such. I would like that to be deeper in tone. So we'll let that dry. We'll come back to it, I think, and deepen the tone of it in due course. But in the meantime, we'll clean up again and look at the basically the last of the colours within the flower. Now, we're going to look at the last of the flower colours, which is this. And maybe you can see that a little bit closer there. And look at how we've changed away from these rich colours. And if you become aware of a pattern emerging, it could be an interesting experiment. I'm going to try this. I probably regret it, but I'm going to try it anyway. That what has been happening here as we've worked towards the lighter saturated, towards the darker desaturated. In other words, where we have light on the flower, it's there. Where we have shadow or no light, it becomes cooler and more desaturated. You know, duller and more desaturated, and so on. So if that's the pattern emerging, what we could do is say, okay, from memory then, what did we do? We first of all turned the lemon yellow to an orangey colour because it's much redder than that. We know that it's getting redder and redder over an orange all the way. So let's do that without, just do it on the presumption that that's what we did with everything else then. And the other thing is we look at that and we know that that's desaturated, it's drained out and it's dull. So we'll add the complementary. So what we'll just do is not take sample by sample. We'll just use our own, if you like, logic and follow what seems to be happening within the flower as shadow emerges. So here's our lemon yellow. What we're going to do is say, well, we know it's not lemon, it's orange, oranger, if there is a word like that. So I'm going to put a wee bit of red on the side here, just to have that to dip into. And it's considerably oranger, more orange. I have to stop using that word, oranger. And you can see there, look, you know, we're really, I'm just taking a chance and saying, well, if that's what happened to the others, let's do the same with this. So I've got a really quite a reddy orange, maybe more red orange than the previous one. Okay, and I'm not going to do a sample. I'm just going to do this all the way until I see if I can strike it. And now what did we do? We thought, well, we know it's much more desaturated. Now that is a reddish, that is very red. It's bordering on being red. So it's more likely that we're looking at a blue-green color or a green. So what we'll do is make that up, because remember, we're only using 3 colors here, so we have to make up these colors. There's our yellow. We'll take a little bit of ultramarine blue, a wee bit more than that. So we're getting a greenish end of blue, and I'm going to add that in. I'm going to desaturate that with that color. And I'm going to take, now I know that's quite thin, but I'm going to take a little sample card here. And let's see if I can find one that hasn't been kind of used. There we are. And drop that color on. I want you to see this. Look at that. We're really close. And we didn't try sampling and we just went for it first time. That's still a wee bit red, I think. That's fair enough. That's too warm. It may be then we just drop that wee bit extra blue. That, in other words, that blue-green maybe needed to be more blue. So I'm going to drop a little bit more blue in there. Not overdo it because it might turn it too green. And we'll just take this side, just scrape that on there. And if you can see that, I hope that we're very, very, very close indeed. So I'm very pleased with myself with that one. And but more importantly, I'm going to drop this in here where we felt that deeper tone was, you know. And again, it probably could be darker, but remember with watercolors, there's this tendency for color to be that wee bit maybe fresher, but we'll drop it in. It's the main thing is it's deeper and more muddy than the rest, and we'll maybe just take with a damp brush and try to meld that a wee bit more naturally, you know, there and there, you know. So we sort of have the variations of color happening. As I say, it's not a brilliantly manipulated painting of blended, but you know, it samples what we've got there. And what I'm trying to do is achieve at least some sense of how the colors went from pure light saturated to dark desaturated and colder. You know, even though we went first to reddish orange, we then added a complementary to nullify them, and it turns out basically brown, you know, which is what we've got here. But you can see in the photograph, the colors themselves are more dense versions than that. You know, they're heavier, and perhaps if we really wanted to, we could go back and do that. But then again, it is a watercolor, and something nice maybe about that. The main thing is that we have again used our knowledge and practice to match colors. So what I might do lastly is try to maybe just achieve something of the green actually. So I'll pause for a second and clean up. All right, what we have, I put another sample in there in this little photograph of this green, very, very deep green. You can see there, I took it from somewhere over there. So we know that not all of the pictures, that the background is the same green, but we had to make some sort of selection. So, you know, we're going to go with that. So you can see already, there's my lemon yellow. Of course, it's nowhere near green. And to get any sort of green, we need to start adding some blue. So we'll go straight into that. And some of these things sound not obvious, but they are obvious. And you know, sometimes people think, well, you know, okay, we know that blue and yellow make green and all the rest, but I'm trying to encourage you to get this in your mind as if you don't even think about it. I know at school when we were kids, it was like doing the times tables, you know, 2 2s are 4 and so on and so on and so on, over and over and over again. That's the way we learned it anyway. I'm sure it's not today, but and eventually you got thinking, you know, we're going to do times tables again today, and I know that it's just going to be like a rhyme. But actually, what happens, it gets so ingrained in your mind that I know now when I'm calculating anything, I don't even feel as if I'm thinking about it. I can see the picture of it immediately in my brain. And learning the process of what added to what gives what in colour, if you do it again and again and again, then when you're working with your palette, you find your hand daubing in, and you realise you haven't thought about it because it's nearly instinctive, you know. So keep that in mind if you would. What I'm going to do here is I'm thrashing around a little bit, find another little sample card. So we know, look, that is obviously green, but look how it's still on the yellow end. We could blue that down to begin with. We could make it cooler. So we'll do exactly that. We'll throw in some ultramarine. So we're getting a very, very blue-green here. Turn that off. Put a wee bit of that in there. We'll see. So we're getting closer. Look at that in temperature. But do you notice again that the green we have is slightly earthy? And if earthy and browny means it's desaturated slightly, very slightly. So what I'm going to do is put in a tiny bit of red, not as much as I did when we were doing the flower, I think, because we do want to keep it green. It is green. So there's our little bit of red there. I've just touched the little pot of red, no more. So I'm going to stir that in. And it's barely noticeable, but it does make a difference. We put it in there on the edge of our thing, and look what we got. Look, still a bit rich. Let's put one last wee bit of red in there. Okay, and I'm gonna stick with that All right. So there is the color I've got there. Sorry, just get that a little bit better. I haven't made that much of it up. Kind of happier with that, but darker version of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow that process one more time. And again, because there's a lot of area to cover. So here I am, I've warmed it. You can see it's turning yellow again because I'm adding yellow. Bit more yellow. So, okay, too yellow. We need to cool it, bring it down to the green end. So this time, what we're looking at, we're moving in this area. This is previously when we were looking at the petals. Remember I said we're moving up and down here, adjusting our pointers and too warm, too cold, whatever, and we're staying within that zone. Now we're moving to the blues and greens that we're dealing with. So this is our zone, okay? What I've done here actually is I've begun to build up the color in this little floral picture, if you like. Just really because it is possible in watercolor, because the color tends to be more washy and a bit transparent at times, and you need to work sometimes a little bit harder to get that density, but it's quite easy to do if you work through it. And what I was doing was following the same process of color mixing, adding and adjusting temperatures, and putting another layer on. So you can see now that this bottom section has become more dense and deeper, darker, and likewise this edge, these edges here, which were originally slightly paler version of that, are a wee bit richer. And I suppose arguably I could do the same with the greens in the background as well. You know, I could take a much deeper version. If you see me mixing this up, there's a very blue-green. And remember what I did, I desaturated it very, very slightly, dropped a little bit of red in there, a bit more maybe, so you can see that. You can see that turning that earthy color again. And now if we were to apply some of that down in the bottom, you might begin to see, I'll not put it over the whole thing, I just want you to see it beside that section of the flower. So you can see how that throws out the flower. And at the same time, we're using colors that we've matched or tried to match and haven't guessed it. So as I say, now it's up to you. Have a go at this, follow the procedure, and don't worry about how the image looks as much as whether or not you're saying something about the relationship. So I'm hoping that you can see that, you know, I've achieved some of that color that's happening there. That more muted color is happening down here, and so on. And it's not just guesswork. So let me see how you get on. Send me in your pictures and I'll get back to you about that.